Sorry, just a quick question.
Sure.
When do we find the recordings? Sorry, I just joined last night. Yeah, like
Sure.
I'm sure you probably announced it, but I'm not aware.
Sure. So there are a couple of ways. If you're in Global Affairs Canada, you can find, and you have a working Teams account, you can find the recordings in Teams. So this is how you would do it. If you go into Teams and you try to go into other applications, you would look for MS Stream. Stream is where video recordings are held, right? You go into your Stream account, and then it will take you to what's called your watch list. And your watch list is probably blank. So you'll say, what's this? How come, where are the videos? If you look on the right corner, there's another icon that says Stream. So you click on that icon, it says Stream, and it brings you kind of to a website that is MS Stream. And there's a heading that allows you to search for videos. And you search for videos, search for FS-02, and then all of the ones that I've recorded will come up. So that's the way through to navigate through stream recordings. However, because that's a really cumbersome way of trying to find these videos, I've also been posting them in I've been posting them in our Facebook groups. So that's another way to get them. On top of that, stream recordings are not available to people who do not have a Global Affairs Canada account, unfortunately. So even if you try to share the link with somebody else who doesn't have an account with us in Global Affairs Canada, they won't be able to watch those stream recordings. So what I've done is uploaded these videos in YouTube as well. So what I've posted in our groups is the link to the stream recording and the corresponding link to the YouTube recording. And this is one of those things in YouTube where if you were to go into YouTube and search, you would not find it. You must have the YouTube link in order to view the video. So those are the ways that you would find it.
Thank you very much, CJ. And when you refer to our group, this is where exactly?
Sorry, say again.
When you say that you post it on our group, is it still in Teams, or where is it exactly, the location?
No, these are our groups that we normally have through Facebook. We have groups that are for the general foreign service. There are groups for Global Affairs Women's Network, Visible Minority Network. I've sent them as well to the mentors that are helping people with this competition. And if you still cannot find these links, you can always just email me and I'll send you the list.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Are there other questions before we start? How's everyone feeling? It's a small group. I like this group. It's kind of small. How are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you nervous about? And what are you thinking you need help with today? Come, you have to talk. Go ahead, Susan.
Just in general writing tips, because I'm not an FS yet, so I'm not used to writing. So just general tips would be helpful. I mean, I've been basically writing CMM meeting minutes only for 8 years. And I like to say I'm good at summarizing, but then just in terms of like, because I'm not sure what what format this would be. For example, like, am I doing recommendation to a program manager, or like, am I writing briefing note? Because I have zero experience in that. Like, it's just I just think it's a bit broad, and I imagine it would be like, for example, since the written portion is 90 minutes long, I imagine it's like 45 minutes prep and 45 minutes go time. I have no idea, or they're just going to allow me the 90 minutes to do whatever I want. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really true. There's not a lot of guidance on the written section, and that is nerve-wracking. Amber, go ahead, and then we can talk about the writing section, I suppose.
I agree. I would like some support and tips for the written portion as well. I also don't have a lot of experience writing as much as I do doing interviews. Like for the FS1, it was just an interview with a small written 500 character essay, which was fairly straightforward. But I wonder if maybe you could give some tips or ideas what you think could come about from the knowledge question of global affairs priorities? Like, what could that look like? I mean, I don't think that they would just ask us to write what they are and explain. Obviously, it'll be some kind of situation that we'll have to build upon and include the priorities. But I just wondered what you thought maybe that could include. Thank you.
Sure. No problem. Yeah, I think that would be best for us. Maybe we can just work on that, the written section today. It's a bit tricky because, of course, it's difficult to write things here on this platform, but we're going to talk about writing as opposed to writing, I suppose. Okay, so on the written section of the test, HR has told you that the two things that are going to be assessed are knowledge of government of Canada, not government, sorry, knowledge of global affairs Canada's priorities and analytical thinking. And they've told you that there will be 2 questions. They haven't told you anything else. They, aside from knowing that it's 90 minutes for that section, you know nothing else. So is it 1 question with 2 parts? You know, 1 on knowledge and then 1 on thinking things through, on analyzing something that's, I don't know. Are they going to be 2 totally separate things? I really don't have any clue. So we're going to have to just put our best foot forward. So when it comes then to writing for the department, remember that you're being assessed not just on the content of what you put forward, but also on the effectiveness of your written communication. When they talk about effectiveness of your communication is, can you express your main idea really succinctly and clearly? And is the way you set out your argument also really clear, and does it flow logically, right? That's really what makes something effective. And it's the same with your oral expression. When we've talked about structuring your answer orally, it's the same mindset for structuring your answer in writing. It has to flow a certain way. Because think of that from the perspective of, say, a manager who's looking for an FS-02 to work with. They need somebody who can write well. And writing well means somebody who understands what the whole issue is, whatever it is, who sets it out really clearly. If there are some subparts, they lay out those subparts really clearly, and they guide the reader through to a conclusion that makes sense. So in terms of thinking about how to write, think about things that you have read that have been clear, and think about things that you've read that haven't been, where you got to the end of it, you didn't know what they were trying to say, right? So that's kind of the perspective you need to take on this, to say, look, at the end of this, what's the point that I want them to walk away with? At the end of this, what do I want them to keep in mind? At the end of this, what do I want them to say? Oh yes, when I read that thing, this is what it told me. So if you think like that, start with that end in mind. Now then when you begin, you start building your argument in such a way that it leads to that conclusion. So let's talk about what that looks like. So there are the 2 competencies. You have the definition for analytical reasoning, which is a little bit sparse. It's a little bit thin. I'd shared, I think, in an earlier session, a link rather to the definition of analytical thinking that our friends over at the National Research Council of Canada had prepared. And it essentially, it looks like the internal competency dictionary definition that Global Affairs Canada puts out, where they have the heading at the top, and then they have the columns throughout, and it shows, the progression of how you think things through. So I thought that was pretty useful. What I can do is find that link now and share that with you. So at least you'll have another perspective on what analytical thinking looks like. So when they ask you a question based on analytical thinking, you can have that in mind. Would that be helpful? Yes, no, maybe so?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Amber, you have it. Yes, can you share it now? Yeah, if you can put that in the chat, that would be great. You can put the link there. And what we can do is look at that competency a bit more closely. The other thing on knowledge of the government, knowledge of the department's priorities. In a previous version of your instructions, it said knowledge of the departmental plan 2020 to 2021. In your most recent instructions, that second part, knowledge of the departmental plan 2020-2021, has been removed. And it just says knowledge of Global Affairs Canada priorities to make it more difficult for you. But if you go well, at least when I go on Google and throw into the search box, Global Affairs Canada priorities, the first or one of the first links that comes up is the current departmental plan. So really and truly, that is the document that tells you overall what the department is all about. What do we do from one year to the next? What do we focus on? And it spans all of the different streams, all of the different functional areas of the department, right? So that's important to get a bird's eye view, an overview of what does this department do. But before you kind of jump into the weeds to prepare yourself for the written test, what I would suggest to you is that you take a step back again and say, okay, why does this department exist? What is it that this department is meant to do? You know, that's really what it is. That's why we have these different streams, because they all feed into the overall mandate of the department. The department has a particular mandate, and everything that we do is connected to that. Everything that we do flows from it, right? So all these different sections, now you see different departments, you see different divisions rather, you see different sections, different priorities, different plans, different projects, all of them flow from our overall mandate. So it's to have a good understanding of the overall mandate of the department, why we do what we do, and then to say, okay, well, how is that mandate expressed in different areas? So for instance, for the MCO stream, remember, what do MCOs do? Well, tell me, those of you who are on the line, what do MCOs do? Why do we have this stream? What do they do? Can just guess. I mean, you know, I'm not expecting you to know for sure, but you can just guess if you want. Go ahead, Susan.
They're kind of like the backbones to each embassy abroad. So they take care of HR, budget planning, and they manage consular programs, so helping Canadians abroad. And some MCOs also take care of security. Some missions have their own MPSS, readiness and security team. So it depends, but but in the gist of it, it's kind of like another home.
Very good. So if you think of it, what do MCOs do? MCOs are responsible for providing assistance to Canadians abroad. That's it. MCOs are responsible for providing assistance to Canadians in distress abroad and are responsible for Canada's missions and property abroad.
Yeah,
That's
if
what
I may add also
go ahead.
another responsibility, which is support for Canada's presence abroad. So this is all the administration, the HR that Susan was mentioning, security, etc. So this is the field of responsibility under our mandate.
Yeah, so that's it. So that's it. They are our administrators abroad. They manage our property abroad. They provide assistance to Canadians in distress and to Canadians who are on posting abroad. That's what MCOs do. That's why they exist. That's why they're there. That's it. Everything else is detail. Everything else is detail. All the projects you engage in, all the description, everything else just fleshes out something. Everything else an MCO does can be connected back to that. You see? So if you keep this in mind as you walk through some of what you see in the departmental plan and the report on plans and priorities and different speeches and, you know, different mandate letters, you will see it really clearly. Like, oh, everything's connected to something that's probably really simple. Okay, let's see. What do development officers do? Why do we have a development stream? What do they do? You can just guess. If you don't really know, you can just guess.
Once again, they are responsible for the trade and investment.
Development.
Oh, sorry, development. Development are responsible for the programming in peace and security, I guess, development programming as well, overall.
Mm-hmm. Why? What did they do? Go ahead, Susan.
think this is a guess
Sure.
that they're helping poor countries. So things like I think our colleague mentioned security, but I think it's sort of like helping developing countries in that, like, you know, you're helping with human rights, women's rights, education. So projects and funding, making sure like the countries where women and children don't have the same rights, get the same rights, and a lot of most of the time it can be solved by money. So the government has of Canada probably has a big pocket of money for that. So just making sure the money goes where they're needed.
Sure. Can
I'm
you pull up
guessing.
the department? Yeah, exactly. I mean, but that's excellent. You know, it's a good way to just start guessing, saying, what actually do they do? Can you pull up then the departmental plan? It should be available on the internet. Can you pull it up? Just the current one? Because what we're going to do is scroll to the section on development, and we're going to try to see if we can boil down what development is all about to its essence.
I'll look it up right now. I have
Okay.
it printed.
Okay, so while you're pulling up the departmental plan, I'm going to leave development alone because I'm not a development officer.
Our colleague just put it up. There we go.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you.
So those, you can just click on that link. It will open up what that is. See, the table of contents is quite long. But what I want you to look at is that third bullet point that says core responsibilities. Those are the sections. Those are the sections that are the most important, right? Because those are the ones that tell you what we do. So if you click on the one that says Development, Peace and Security Programming, says description. Global Affairs Canada programming contributes to reducing poverty, increasing opportunity for people around the world, alleviating suffering in humanitarian crises, and fostering peace and security, and in so doing advances the Sustainable Development Goals. So what's development all about? If you had to summarize, you could summarize it in kind of a lofty way. If I were going to look at it myself, I might say, okay, how am I going to remember this? I'm going to say
poor country.
helping poorer countries, right? We have a development program because Canada wants to make the world a better place. And the way we make the world a better place is by reducing suffering and by promoting Canadian values that we believe should be international values. Peace and security, you know, avoiding humanitarian crises, reducing poverty. That's what development is about. It's about helping the world become better in line with what we think are the values that the whole world should have and the opportunities the whole world should have. Something along those lines. That's what I would think. That's certainly not official. That's just what I would think, right? But then everything flows from that, right? Everything flows from that. Why do we have a feminist international assistance policy? Because we think it makes the world more peaceful. That's one of the elements of development, right? We think it makes the world more prosperous. That's one of the points under development. You want people to become less poor and more prosperous. We think it makes the world more inclusive. Why? Because that's a Canadian value. We think people should be equal, right? You shouldn't be distinction between you based on what your gender is, right? That's why. You see, so everything flows from that first concept. And that makes it easy to navigate some of this information because it's a lot of detail. And if you don't have that core idea, that core understanding of what each stream is all about and how it connects to the overall mandate of the department, you'll easily get lost in these details. Okay, so let's keep going. I'm going to go back to the table of contents. Okay, so we can go to one of my favorites. I'm a trade officer, so why do we have a trade program? What's trade and investment all about? Come, yeah, put your hand up. Guess. If you're going to guess, go ahead.
About commerce, so promoting trade with other countries, helping Canadian business who want to do, Canadian companies who want to do business in other missions. things to do with selling things.
That's great. But I think Kate was saying something as well. What do you say, Kate?
Yeah, I would say to ensure that we advance Canada's interests for diversified trade. And as Susan said, of course, within that, we're looking at inclusive trade as well. So ensuring that all Canadians have equal opportunity to engage in export activities. And we're helping SMEs go abroad.
Why?
Because it brings flows money to Canada, of course, and I forgot foreign direct investment in that equation as well, but that we're bringing economic opportunities to Canada. So when our SMEs do well, Canada does well.
Okay, so you see there, you're getting to it. Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's also one of the lines that we want to make sure that every Canadian, including women and Aboriginal small enterprises, have access to international markets to make sure that we are contributing to developing prosperity of all Canadians. So that nobody is left behind, that it's not only large companies that have access to trade and investment overseas.
Yeah, these are all elements. But take a step even further back. Why was Global Affairs Canada, as a department, focus on trade and investment? What's that all about? You know, there are other departments could be doing it. Why are we doing it? What's it all about? So you all hit on it, right? You've hit on different elements. So let's pull it together. Global Affairs Canada has an overall mandate to manage Canada's international interests, right? So that's advancement of our direct interests, things that are of benefit to us, and essentially exporting our values, right? Because we think our values are pretty good, and if we export them, other people will adopt them too, and the world will get better. That's what Global Affairs Canada does. Right? So the reason we have this trade and investment is because we are trying to promote a Canadian interest. What's the Canadian interest? We want prosperity for Canada. We want to raise our own GDP. So how are we going to do that? In the international context, which is our mandate. Our mandate is not domestic, it's international. So what are we going to do? We're going to help Canadian businesses export their goods and services internationally so that their activities can benefit Canada's GDP. That's why. That's overall what we're doing, and lead to general prosperity. Everything else flows from that. Everything else flows from that, including our investment mandate, right? We also think that if we promote investment, that will also lead to prosperity for Canada. But then all these other elements, well, we want our trade to be inclusive. Why? Because we want the more generalized benefits of trade. We don't want the trade benefits to accrue only to one group of people. We want it to accrue across the whole country, right? Across the nation. There are different places we want to go internationally. Yeah, because our mandate is international. Our mandate is not domestic. Do you see? Like, take a step back, look overall, what's the big picture? And then everything flows from the big picture. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's keep going. What's another one that we have here? I'm just looking here at, oh yes, of course, international advocacy and diplomacy. What is normally thought of when we think of diplomats? So why do we have this? What's this about? Why do we do this? Why do we have FPDS officers? What do they do?
Become ambassadors eventually? Just kidding.
Yeah, because we need ambassadors. Kate, what do you say? What do we have them for? What's the point of them?
Is it for strengthening bilateral relationships and multilateral relationships?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what else? What do they do?
Oh, anything political, right? So like reaching out to the government. So for example, the MFA,
Mm-hmm.
and they play a huge part in ministerial visits.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Let's look in the definition here that we have, and we'll see what they say at the very top. So, Global Affairs Canada, international advocacy and diplomacy. So notice they put two things, right? International advocacy and diplomacy. What do you think is the difference between those two things? Ah, Leanne, hello.
Hi, sorry I'm late. I had to take my kid to school.
No problem. We're actually just looking at the departmental plan, and we're trying to boil down the essence of some of our different streams, just to say, well, what is it that we do as a department? So what I've said is, what do for our FPDS colleagues do? Why do we have them?
You're mean, you're mean.
As a trade officers always say that, what do you guys do? Terrible. No, but go ahead, Susan. The last question I asked was, I noticed that in the departmental plan, it says international advocacy and diplomacy. And I said, well, what's the difference between advocacy and diplomacy?
I'm guessing advocacy is to go and say something, and diplomacy is like how you do it. No?
Yeah, these are good guesses. Why not? Who else has some more guesses? You don't have to get it right. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can just guess. There's plenty of people in the department are guessing what trade officers do all day. So and they don't have any clues, so don't worry about it. So guess, let's hear some more guesses. What's the difference between international advocacy and international diplomacy? And I myself, I'm to a certain extent, I'm guessing as well. I do have a good idea, but to a certain extent, I am guessing. Because sometimes it will change depending where you are. What else? Come on, don't be shy.
Advocacy is when you actively defend Canadian values and you promote them. And it's about being a little bit, I would say, on an assertive side. And diplomacy, when you just go along with the rules that are already established and you do it smoothly, not to ruffle too many feathers. Just make deals.
Make deals. That's not bad. I would say that's pretty much it.
And I'm not FPDS. That's what I think.
Yeah. So for me, I would think that that's pretty much in line. What you've said so far, that's pretty much in line with what it is. Advocacy means you're pushing a particular line, right? You're pushing you're trying to convince people of something. That's advocacy. You have some interest that you're trying to represent. You have a point of view you're trying to get across. You want people to get on board with you, right? So you're pushing for your point of view. That's advocacy, right? You're speaking on behalf of somebody. You're speaking on behalf of something. That's what it means to advocate for something, right? Diplomacy is more about the relationships, right? Maintaining, building them, fostering them, seeing where we can cooperate, where we can work together, who you can, get in touch with, how you can maintain, develop relationships that you may need later on to leverage, in order to advocate a position, right? That's more what diplomacy is all about. Finding out information, learning the lay of the land and keeping on top of it and being able to explain it to other people to say, look, this is what's going on. This is what's going on. That's why so much of what our colleagues do on the political side is reporting, because what are they doing? They were telling headquarters what's going on. That's what reporting is, right? Makes sense. Would you add anything, Leanne?
I think you covered it. I mean, yeah, when we advocate for, human rights or LGBTI or, a position that Canada takes on a certain issue, like just recently in Geneva, where we pushed for human rights with China and such. Yeah, that's advocacy. But diplomacy, yeah, like you said, it's, building that relationship, working multilaterally, promoting, still promoting Canadian values, but advocacy is more, I think, sort of a specific target, a specific event, or a specific issue that we would advocate for. So I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's what they're linked, right? And that's why the heading says international advocacy and diplomacy, because FPDS officers are expected to do that as their portfolio. And then when you look at the planning highlights in that link, can you, somebody please repost that in the chat so Leanne just has access to it? It's just the departmental plan, Leanne. It says planning highlights, Global Affairs Canada will continue to focus its advocacy and diplomacy efforts on fostering and upholding human rights, democracy and international law, promoting nature, biodiversity, climate action, and ocean health, and supporting sustainable and inclusive growth and lasting peace and security. So those are all the values that we have, right? Those are the values that we hold. So what do? We go and we see who our allies are with respect to these different topics, right? We see who's on board with us, we see who's resistant to us, and when we have a specific position that we want everybody else to get on board with, that's where we push. And that's what advocacy is. It's pushing a particular point of view to see if we can get other people on board so that we can actually make changes in this area that are in line with what Canada wants to see internationally, right? That's it. That's it. There's more detail there in that section. I encourage you to read through it, but just keep that in mind, take a step back and say, oh, that's what FPDS officers do. That's what their job is at its core, right? Let's keep going. We can look at some other sections. We've already looked at development. We looked at trade. We looked at FPDS. We actually didn't look at MCOs. We talked about MCOs without looking at their section. So perhaps what we should do is actually look at their section and see. So would be the section in the core responsibilities that's titled Help for Canadians Abroad. And so it says, Global Affairs Canada provides timely and appropriate consular services for Canadians abroad, contributing to their safety and security. So that's the consular mandate of the MCOs, right? So it's, what is it? Why is it that Global Affairs Canada has this mandate? Because our mandate is international. So when Canadians are outside of Canada, when they are in trouble, they're in distress in some way, it's the responsibility of us as essentially the international department to make sure that we help them where they are. And we help them in a number of different ways, right? They can be in trouble because they were the victims of crime. They can be in trouble because they simply need some basic notarial services. They could be in trouble because they were caught up in some kind of civil unrest, terrorist attack, war, disaster. They can be in trouble because a pandemic broke out and people need to get back home. They can be in trouble because of a lot of reasons. And when Canadians are abroad and are in trouble, they need to be able to turn to their government. And when they need to turn to their government, they turn to the department that is responsible for Canada's international presence, right? And that's us. Does that make sense?
So I would add on this that consular is our #1 priority. It will take precedence over everything else. Like you saw in the pandemic, all the other programs pretty much stopped and everybody focused on consular, making sure that Canadians got home safely. If there's a crisis in your country, consular, will take the forefront. So, it's
our
important.
mandate to help Canadians.
Yeah.
Because it's our mandate to help Canadians. And that's where Canadians have the most interaction with us internationally. It's in consular, even though our department does not seem to recognize that unless there's a crisis.
Yeah, but also doing things like passport renewal. We do a lot of passport renewals or citizenship certificates for newborns or for Canadians that, have lost theirs and things. So it's a wide gamut, but if there's a consular case, a high profile case, like the Bannerman case in Indonesia, that was a big or like the two Michaels, that takes up a lot of width and a lot of space. So, consular is an important part of the work that we do and everybody can get sucked into it.
Yes, that's very true. Because most of the time, again, this is how the average Canadian is most likely to interact with Global Affairs Canada. Most Canadians will not interact with Global Affairs Canada except through consular services, right? Everything else is kind of hidden away from public view. So it's the high profile nature of consular emergencies that tells you why it's so important. And yet people forget. It's kind of like anything else, right? Do you remember to change the batteries in your fire alarm, in your smoke alarm? Is that really something you keep in the front of your mind? And yet, if your place breaks out into flames, all of a sudden that fire alarm becomes the most important thing, right? So it's kind of like that. The consular end is the emergency. Like, hey, I have a crisis and I need your help right now. Drop everything and help me. But when the emergency is not taking place, everyone forgets about it. Unfortunately, that's how it goes. All right, so keep that in mind on the consular side. But remember that the MCOs have a double mandate. So we'll go back then to the core responsibilities and we'll see it there. There's another heading there. It says support for Canada's presence abroad. And this also falls under the MCOs. Global Affairs Canada manages and delivers resources, infrastructure, and services enabling Canada's presence abroad, including at embassies, high commissions, and consulates. So that's that administrative and property management function that the MCOs are also responsible for. Like without them, all of this stuff abroad doesn't work. They're the ones who keep the wheels turning on managing our physical presence, right? Make sense? And so
It's the
everything comes from that. Go ahead.
I was just saying it's the platform.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. So those are the elements. Those are the core responsibilities of the department. And when it comes to the knowledge part, when they're asking you knowledge of the department, you need to have that in mind. You need to understand the broad picture of each one of those bullet points. And then you need to read through and say, okay, well, how does that manifest itself? I understand the main point of what each one of this bullet points says that we do. How does that manifest itself? What are the specific things that people do in order to fulfill this mandate? Oh, okay. That's why we have this policy. That's why we engage in these multilateral organizations. That's why we have this trade and investment promotion project. That's why we do things a certain way, right? Do you understand how that goes? That's how you have to read through that departmental plan. And that's what's going to keep you from getting bogged down in too much detail, right? So keep that main point in your mind, and then it will guide you through the rest. And that's actually what's going to help you remember what's in there, because there's so much detail. If you don't remember the main point, you know, you'll get lost. Well, there's this, and you won't remember the through line through all of it. You won't remember the thing that connects it all together, right? Any questions there? We're still going to dig some more into the departmental plan and how you can craft your answer, but I want to just stop and check if there are any questions, anything that's unclear. No, everyone good with that? How many people have already tried to read through? Oh, go ahead, Susan.
So just to confirm, the support for Canadians' presence abroad, so that one is MCO responsibility also?
Yeah, because they're talking about our physical presence. Now,
Right, so that was what you were talking about when you said the presence, establishing physical presence of missions abroad. That's
yeah,
that's
the actual
MCO.
physical spaces that we have, you know, somebody needs to manage them, right? And so that property mandate falls under the MCO's responsibility. Now, just
Okay.
because it falls under the MCO's responsibility doesn't mean nobody else has a role to play. But that's one of the responsibilities of the department, and overall it's the MCO who has to keep an eye on things. So for instance, I'm right now, and so is Leanne, we are at post right now, and we live in staff quarters. We live in certain locations. Some of the locations we have abroad are owned by the government of Canada, and some of the locations we have abroad for people to live in are rented by the government of Canada. And some are, you know, some other arrangement, but we won't get into that.
Thank
If
you.
if I, while I'm here, destroy the apartment that I'm living in, I take an axe to the face. Surely that's, you know, that falls on me. I'm not supposed to be doing that. I'm not supposed to be destroying the place. But who would have to deal with the fallout? You know, who would have to deal with the property manager, the owner of the building? Who would have to work out the insurance claim? Who would have to, you know, work out the repairs that needed to be done? It would be the MCO. The MCO would have to work on that, right? Because it falls in their mandate, right?
They also cover, you know, the finance stuff, paying all the bills and everything, and then all the HR as well. Like every LES is, you know, managed by the MCOs. Their pay and everything. So.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think of it, the reason we have locally engaged staff is because they're employees of what? They're employees of our missions abroad. And so who's responsible for our physical presence abroad? It's the MCO. So that's why the MCO is responsible for all of that contracting, all of that administration, because that falls in their portfolio. Makes sense? No. Now, there are other elements that come up in the departmental plan. They're like internal services, of course, because all of this, there's also a whole backbone of stuff that happens. And one of the backbones that's really obvious are things like our IT services. Remember when we had that outage last week where the whole IT system went down for a day? Nobody could do any work, right? Again, it's kind of like consular. Nobody thinks about it until it doesn't work. And then there's a big crisis, right? So internal services are things like that. You know, all the finance, the administration, you know, all the stuff that goes on in the background that keeps everything working. All of that is part of our mandate as well. Why is it part of our mandate? Because we can't do our work without it. That's why. We can't carry out our mandate without it. That's why. Make sense? Okay, any questions there? Okay, so if there are no questions, okay, how then can you start to translate some of this stuff into a written answer? Well, the written answer will depend on the written question, obviously, and we're guessing now as to what the question might look like. Based on what other people have said and based on experience with this kind of thing in the past, what I would suggest that you do is a couple of things to prepare. When it comes to knowledge of the department, again, read through the departmental plan, get a good sense of where it is, but then do two things. The first thing is to think through if they ask you something about yourself in the past, you know, how have you worked on something similar to what Global Affairs Canada does? You know, where have you helped further the department's mandate in some way, right? Where have you done something that's similar to what Global Affairs Canada does as a priority? Explain how what you were doing before fits within the mandate of the department. Something of that nature. I would say prepare that and think through your previous experience and where it dovetails with Global Affairs Canada's mandate, and think about how you would talk about that. So to explain it, to say, okay, I was in such and such situation. Again, use our same STAR format that we've talked about before. If anybody doesn't know what that is, we'll go over it right now. So if you don't know what it is, please put your hand up and we'll discuss it right now. Okay, so everyone's okay with if I say STAR format, you know what I'm talking about. Very good. Okay, so we talk about this, the situation in which I found myself. This is what I was supposed to accomplish. The task fits with Global Affairs Canada's mandate in this way because it was in line with this section of the department, this overall Canadian value. Our work that I was engaged in was actually in line with it in this way. These were the tasks that I had to do, and this is how, you know, it's very similar to what a Global Affairs Canada employee would have had to do, you know, or taking it slightly from the department's perspective. If I've been working for the department, I might have been pushing this because that's what's in line with the current priority of the department, something of that nature. So that's how you answer the question if they ask you to refer to something in the past. What I suspect is probably more likely is that they might ask you a hypothetical. They might say, well, based on your knowledge of Global Affairs Canada's priorities, please choose an area and tell us what you would do if you were going to add a new project. You know, so explain the area that you've chosen, explain, you know, what's already there. Tell us what new project you would add and explain how it fits within the overall mandate of the department, and tell us the steps you would take to establish this project and how the results of that project would further Canada's international interests. Something like that, right? Because what they want to do is say, do you understand what the mandate is? Do you understand what's already there? And can you think of something new that could also fit within that umbrella, underneath that umbrella, right? That's maybe where they might go. Leanne, do you think that's off base? What do you think?
Oh, it's so hard to tell what they're gonna ask. But I always think that they could ask something like, you know, tell us about the key priorities or something with the feminist international assistance program plan or the feminist foreign policy, you know, or you know, sustainable development goals. I would be looking at PCO as well and seeing, you know, what the government priorities are. How does GAC fit into the overall government priorities?
Yeah,
You know,
but that's the thing, right? Is people are coming from all kinds of different walks of life, People are
Yeah.
coming from the entire public service as well. So the people who have
Yes.
no exposure, right, to this before. So it's
Yeah, so it has to be
difficult.
general.
Yeah, it has to be general. Or they might say, choose one of these different areas, and then they essentially choose one section from each part of the priorities, right? That's another way they could do it. You choose from one of these 5 and explain it and talk about it a bit and talk about why this a project underneath that heading exists. Like, why does a project underneath that heading exist, and what's the point of it, and how does it work, right? That's another way that they could get to the answer, because then there's no bias for anybody one way or another way. If you're, for instance, a trade officer and you've never done any consular work at all, they can't just ask you a question about consular work, because of course that privileges those people who are in consular, right? If they give you a lot of options, then you can choose the one that you know the best. And that
Yeah,
way there's no bias. Yeah.
That
Go ahead,
makes
Maria.
sense.
Yeah, so what I was gonna say is along those lines, what I found in this type of competitions is that they do because they're trying to be fair to everyone, they more often than not just ask you to choose. And then the other thing that you guys should be preparing for is to learn one of those subjects quite well and then be able to provide recommendations in a very short period of time. This might be in the form of please provide a memo or a briefing note or something like that. And remember, you only have, I think it's 90 minutes to do this. So what I found very useful for me in the past is when they give these very, very broad knowledge parameters, is that I have some text that I have already taken or written in my own words from each of these knowledge areas that I may not be that familiar with. And that will then help me in the exam to organize my ideas in a quicker way.
But then remember, Maria, I'm not sure if you're allowed to bring any outside material into the written part of the test. You have to check with HR to say what
Right.
you're allowed to bring in. In the past, it's been you're allowed to bring nothing. You
No,
have
no,
to
no,
just
no.
bring
I'm
in
not saying.
the-
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I'm not
Yeah.
saying. I'm not saying to bring it in.
Mhm.
I'm just saying it.
Yeah.
It's in my way of studying, rewriting those priorities. Those elements helps me to better learn them, especially like I come from the development side, for example, and I know nothing about trade or the FPDS side. And so reading is, it still means not that much to me, but it's easier if I have already written something. When the exam comes, it's much easier for me to just say like, oh yeah, I remember writing about this, so it's easier
Absolutely. Yeah.
to pop it back up into the exam.
Absolutely.
But
Writing
but yeah,
sample ahead of time. If you have to summarize, maybe that's a writing exercise, is really try to summarize in your own words what each of the core responsibilities are of the department and why they exist. Like, what's the point of them? How does each one of those core responsibilities connect to the overall mandate of Global Affairs Canada? You write that through and you kind of get it. And for sure, something along those lines would be useful to put in the written exam, in the written
yeah,
test, right?
and then
Because it shows that you understand.
exactly, and then one of the type of recommendations is always merged into or is often merged into a type of question that is, well, you're in country X and you are now, like, let's say they're opening a new program on X, provide the recommendations. So always remember that, even, and this is both for the writing but also for the interview, to not stay just within one stream, but to explain how you would consult or take into consideration most of the other streams, to show that really cross-cutting knowledge of Global Affairs Canada and our mandate in trade, FPDS, and development. So sorry,
Yeah.
I just needed to interrupt because I need to go to another meeting
Okay.
at 2.
No
But
problem.
that's
Thanks,
what I
Maria.
just wanted to get out.
Thank you. So in terms of making sure to go cross stream, again, remember that your first priority in this exercise is to answer the question, right? And so I'm coming to you, Amber. I see your hand. Don't worry. Make sure you answer the question, right? If you have room to talk about other streams, if you have room to talk about something outside of what it is that you are presenting, then that's fine. But remember that your first priority is to answer the question that's being asked. So that's the main thing. You have to read that question and understand what it's asking you to do. If it says, please provide recommendations, make sure you write, my recommendations are. If it says, tell us what the mandate of the department is in one of the functional areas, you say, I'm choosing to write about the functional area of trade and investment. The mandate of the department in this area is overall to do this. What does that look like? It looks like doing this, doing this, doing this. Why? Because from doing all these things, it connects right back up to the main point of why we're here, the mandate of the department, right? Make sense? Go ahead, Amber.
So we're going to be assessed on knowledge of GAC's priorities. The year has been eliminated, but is that, because I'm on the website, is that under the ministers tab? Because then you have the 4 specific priorities, although it says 2021, but I just wonder, is that what we should be looking at? Because if you click on the first link, which is,
That's
it
from
says
the
the
ministry.
ministers,
Yeah.
and it says to
That's what-
support this work. Okay, in 21, 22, we can ignore that. The department will focus on 4 priorities. So are we supposed to be, the way I'm seeing is that that's what the priorities are, and that's what we should understand and
Yeah.
prepare for.
Yes,
Right?
yes,
Of course, understanding
absolutely.
all the other streams and the responsibilities and all of that of the department are crucial.
Absolutely.
And a huge
'Cause
part of
if
the
you-
puzzle. But I just want to ensure that, yeah, okay.
Yeah, because it's those
you.
4 priorities that are listed there. That's where all the different streams of the department fit together. You'll notice that that's where you're seeing a lot of that cross streaming. You see? So let's look at those 4 priorities. So the department, first of all,
Yeah,
there's the
'cause I was-
message from the minister. There's a message from the minister, and that's their kind of their letter that opens it up. It's kind of the, oh, this is what we do, and this is who we are, and whatnot. So that kind of gives you that background. And there's a lot of good stuff in that letter because it gives you the mindset that you need to have in mind, right? It's the mindset of the ministers, the mindset of the department. And then it says, okay, plans at a glance. This, again, you'll start to see some of the same themes being returned to. And then it says, for this year, these are our 4 priorities, right? Contributing to a rules-based international system that advances Canadian interests. How many different streams of our activities does that touch on? It touches on practically all of them, right? And then you read through and it says, international law, democracy, human rights, gender equality, climate change, peace and security, feminist approach, multilateral regional forum, bilateral action, diversity, inclusion, all those things, right? All those things. So all the streams are touched by this. Second priority, supporting Canadian exporters and economic recovery, building economic resilience, and working toward the renewal of the rules-based multilateral trading system. This is largely a trade priority, but it touches other streams as well, right? Deepening Canada's engagement in the world. What's this? Largely what? Largely FPDS, but it touches other streams as well. But it's talking specifically in that about, well, what does that really mean? Talks about relations with the United States and Mexico as a priority. Talks about Europe and our relationship with the EU. It talks about the Indo-Pacific region, right? So it's saying, it talks about, well, in Africa, this is what we're going to do. In the Middle East, this is what we're going to do. In Latin America and the Caribbean, this is what we're going to do. The only places that have been left out is Antarctica. That's it. That's pretty much all the whole world, So, but it's talking about, well, how is it that Canada is going to engage with the world internationally? What are we going to do? How are we going to do it, right? And then think back, okay, so which programs are going to be affected by these overall goals? And the 4th is eradicating poverty, right? Again, now this comes back to our friends in development primarily, but it touches other programs as well. So then you go through those things. So those are the 4 big priorities And how do we fulfill those priorities? Well, it's through our streams that we work through, right? Through the core responsibilities. Okay, go ahead, Amber.
So, I mean, it doesn't, they eliminated the year in the
Yeah.
new email that they just sent yesterday. So which
Right.
one do we then focus on? Because now this is a new set of priorities for this year, and we still have the ones from last year. So, and they're different.
Yeah, they
So,
are. They're
I mean,
different every year. They're different
every
every year.
year, of course,
Every year they're
every
different.
year.
Yeah, so just
So
say,
it
look,
was almost,
I'm
it was
based,
almost more helpful. It was almost more helpful when they had narrowed it down to the year. But now,
yeah.
where do we put our focus?
No, the focus is on you tell them. If they don't ask you, then you tell them. They're not going to ask you about a priority from 5 years ago. They're saying, what are Global Affairs Canada's priorities? The priorities, if the year's not specified, it's always the current year. And if you are answering the question, you say, well, I'm answering, you can say in your answer, I'm answering from the current year's priorities. That's it. So don't panic. Go ahead, Leanne.
So I think it's really important. Yeah, priorities, responsibilities. When you read the question, read it carefully, because if you're answering about our core responsibilities and you don't talk, and you talk about the question asks about that, and then you talk about priorities, you need to make sure you read the question properly, underline exactly what they're asking, because they may ask you about the priorities or they may ask you about the responsibilities. They're interlinked, but they're not exactly the same.
Exactly.
I agree with you, CJ. Learn the new ones.
Yeah.
You know, for 2021, 22. And they're not the same, but they're always very similar, right? Like when you look at the priorities, the first one covers everything FPDS and some development stuff. The second one covers trade. You know, like
Right.
they really focus on our core responsibilities. But you know the difference between the responsibilities and the priorities. The responsibilities don't change usually
Right.
so much. The priorities
Right.
every year get tweaked a little bit. You know, maybe this year we focus more on the US, or next year we focus more on Europe or something. But make sure you read the question, because if you answer and you have a great answer and it doesn't answer the question, you won't get points.
Exactly so. So when you look at those 4 priorities, look at the first one was talking about what? Talking about our engagement in the international system, the systems that exist, right? Not just our bilateral relationships, but the whole international order, that rules-based international order. That's what that first one was talking about. Then the second one started talking about I think the second was trade, right? The second was trade and investment. Yeah. That's what it was. The third one was about our bilateral relationships, or multilateral, but Canada with specific regions of the world, right? How we're going to engage with them. And the fourth one was about eradicating poverty, making the world better. Those are the 4 priorities. That's it. That's it. Everything else is detail. Everything else is, okay, well, how did the different streams approach these 4 different priorities? What role do they have to play in advancing what is discussed under each of these 4 headings? But those are the 4 headings. That's it.
And make sure you memorize it.
Yeah. So like we just told you, those are the 4. It says it right there on the page. Those are the 4. Those are the 4 priorities. And how do we advance those priorities? Through our core responsibilities. That's it. And now it's a question of how to write about that. But it's kind of hard for us to give you advice because we don't know what the question is. But nonetheless, even if we don't know what the question is, we know that you have to structure your answer. You have to read the question really carefully, see what's being asked of you, right? What are you being asked to do? Are you being asked to prepare recommendations on something? Are you being asked to describe something? Are you being asked to come up with something new? Are you being asked to compare 2 things, right? Whatever you're being asked to do, make sure that's what you address in your answer. Make sure that's what you address. And you can state it explicitly. This question has asked me to do this. And so I do this by. I describe whatever it is you asked me to describe. I give you the points that you asked me to raise. If you asked me to describe a process or describe, what steps I would take, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, here's step 4. And this is why I would do these steps. And this is why I would do them in this order, because I understand that that's my role as an FS-02 officer. And as an FS-02 officer, it's my role to do those things because I'm here to further the mandate of the department, which I understand is this. Okay? That's how you show knowledge of the department and knowledge of the priorities. Make sense? Any questions there? Okay, so if there aren't more questions just on the knowledge of the department, what I can do is pull up in the chat. Can you repost, please, in the chat where the links were to our friends over at the National Research Council? And also, please pull up your definition from headquarters on the analytical thinking. That's the competency that's also being assessed in the writing section. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Amber. Okay, so you'll see the most recent link there. The reason that we've shared that link with you is because our friends at the National Research Council have developed more bullet points describing what it means to think analytically. This is not the definition that the department uses, but it's something useful because it is a branch of the federal government that has looked at that and has provided this as an explanation. And it's not harmful to say, oh, okay, that's what's meant by analytical thinking. It helps flesh out your understanding of the competency, right? But in terms of what you're being assessed on, you're being assessed on the definition that HR has provided to you. So just keep that in mind. But what we can do is have a look at what NRC has put together. So click on that link, please. And you can bring it up. And you'll notice that it's a publicly accessible link. It's not something that's hidden behind anybody's particular firewall. Okay, so in terms of what the NRC says, they talk about analytical thinking in this way. They talk about it in terms of doing an analysis of cause and effect, being really systematic, doing things in a step-by-step manner, being able to identify key issues, being able to say, okay, there's a problem here, or look, there's an opportunity here, right? Being able to spot those things. And then when you have a certain amount of information, being able to say, okay, if we do A and we do B, it will lead to C, right? Drawing a logical conclusion. So it's a lot about that, thinking things through, anticipating what things are going to happen and how you should react to them. That's analytical thinking, being able to step back and look at something in its entirety and to be able to craft logical steps throughout, right? That's analytical thinking. So for them, they put as level 1, breaking down straightforward problems into their components, right? So you break down a concrete problem into parts and organize the information in a concise manner. You recognize what facts are pertinent, what are the issues that make up a problem, being able to ask some standard questions and follow first line of investigation to identify the key elements of the situation, using sound judgment, using known procedures, things that you already have, no reinventing the wheel. Use things that you already know work in order to address a given problem or solution. The next level goes into being able to identify cause and effect. You do A, you're going to get to B, right? Weighing up those factors that you've identified. This factor is more important, this one less so. This is a concern, but not so much right now. This is a more pressing concern we have to deal with immediately, right? Analyzing the pros and cons of the situation and what are the risks that come with any particular course of action. Looking at the strength of this argument, the weakness of an argument, judging the merits of what's being presented to you. And as you get further along in more, as the scale progresses, it says analyzing multiple causal relationships between several different parts of a problem, right? A leads to B, but B leads to C, and C leads to D. Defining and confirming the nature of a problem, looking at it from different angles, anticipating the risks or implications inherent in a suggested plan of action, right? Identifying risk, and it's that kind of foresight as well. Makes a well-reasoned response even when faced with incomplete or contradictory information, which is often what we're dealing with. Oftentimes we don't have the full story, or we have things that are in conflict, and we still have to come up with a way forward. Right? Navigates ways around a wide range of guidelines. And so if you have guidelines, you can interpret how do these all work together. and you synthesize complex ideas, issues, and observations into a clear understanding, making things clear. That's really what analytical thinking is about. And then, of course, you'll see that there's level 4 and 5, but normally those are getting into a much higher management levels, even in NRC. It is similar to us. You know, the more you go towards the right, the higher the level is that competency would be associated with, right? Make sense? So for me, if I were designing this particular thing, what I would do is give you a fact scenario. And I would say, how would you think your way through this problem? That's how you would demonstrate that you have this competency. You can think some things through. You can identify, you know, this is what where the problems are. This is what's likely to happen. This is where I would need to get more information. This is where I would look for existing guidelines to help me. This is where I would say, I don't have enough information to make a decision. I need to seek some more out. You know, I would give you a fact scenario if I were designing this, and I would ask you to write based on my fact scenario. So on something like this, I might give you like some really complex problem has happened at work, and you need to come up with some recommendations for your boss as to how to navigate the problem. You know, some big contracting issue, or I don't know, some local groups are upset with the department, but there's conflicting information. This group says you haven't done this, and you owe this to, you were supposed to do this and you didn't do it, and blah blah. And this other group says, no, it wasn't our responsibility, it was your responsibility, and we're angry as well, and we have a different perspective on this. And somebody else says, oh, but then all the contracting is wrong as well. There's also some problems there. What do we do? What do we do? And then your manager comes to you and says, okay, look at the situation and tell us what's gone on. Tell us what we should do now. You know, that's, if I were crafting it, that's what I would write for you. What do you think, Leanne?
Oh, you are me. I have no idea. I mean, they could ask that, they could ask something totally different, right?
Yeah, who knows?
They can also ask you 2 questions about the priorities and put the analytical thinking in both, right? As the way you structure your answer.
That's right. That's also true, right? They could say, do you think things through really clearly yourself? They could ask you a 2-part question, right? The first part is demonstrate the knowledge of the priorities, like show that you know what they are. And then the second part is, oh, you know, some problem has arisen, or there's some challenges. Tell us what you think some of the challenges are. Or you're presented with the challenge, you know, provide some recommendations as how to navigate that challenge, you know, based on analytical thinking or whatever it is, right? Show us. Or
how would you advance Canadian interests in this area? You know, then you'd have to talk about, you know, through the multilateral, through the bilateral, through, you know, engaging with partners and trying to find like allies and such. I mean, there's all kinds of different questions. It's really hard to give good guidance on that.
Yeah, we don't have a lot to go on, unfortunately. But again, you would answer according to the wording of the question. If the question is focused on analytical thinking and they say, tell us, you know, how to navigate through this situation by identifying the problems that are there and how you identify the problems and identify where you would need more information and tell us, you know, what would be the best course of action, then those are 3 different things, right? Tell us what the problems are, tell us where you are lacking information, and tell us what you would do and why, right? So then you'd start by saying, okay, analyzing this situation, I see 3 problems here. Problem A is this, and why is that a problem? Because of this. Problem B is this, and why is that a problem? Because of this. Problem C is this, and why is that a problem? Because of this. So those are the 3 problems. You've also asked me to talk about where I need more information. Well, the question tells me that this situation has come up, but somebody else is giving some conflicting information. So I don't know which one is true. So in order to address this problem, I would have to find out A, B, and C, right? In order to resolve that incomplete information. If there's something else lacking, I noticed that somebody has raised an issue, but it doesn't seem to be, you know, germane to the main point. Main point seems to be this. This other element is important, but it's something we can deal with at a later time because the more pressing issue is this. So even though there's incomplete information about all these other things, they're not the main thing. The main thing are the three problems that I've already identified, right? So what would I do? Well, I would have to come up with recommendations to deal with these three problems, right? So the first problem, we could deal with it in this way, and this way, right? Because this is what's most important to resolve this issue. You know, as Leanne was saying, for instance, when a major consular emergency happens, everything else drops. So if you're presented with a situation where you have a problem with a trade and investment conference and also a big earthquake, guess what's going to take priority, right? You're going to say, well, there's a massive earthquake, and that takes priority over the trade and investment conference because our mandate is to assist Canadians abroad. And in the middle of a crisis, you know, we have to deal with that in the moment. It's the most urgent thing to deal with, because if we don't deal with it, Canadians could die. And we cannot have that. So we're going to intervene on that. So the second problem with the trade and investment conference, we can deal with that once the consular emergency is under control, but we do have to make sure that we do deal with it. Because even when there's a major emergency happening, that doesn't mean that you have to ignore everything else, right? If there's a fire in your kitchen, you have to put out the fire in your kitchen. Sure thing, but you also have to pay your rent, right? You can't not pay your rent because there was a fire in your kitchen, right? Do you see?
Just to add to that, CJ, make sure that you use the key words. Like if I look at the table you just sent from NRCan, you know, I would say, you know, I would break down the problem into their components. I would make sure to analyze the relationship between the concrete situations. You know, like use the words that they say.
But that's just the thing. There are words that they've been given for this competency, analyzing or thinking things through, whatever the title is. It's really thin. I find it's not much there, right? I'll pull it up now and I'll just read it out, because it's just the heading essentially that you would have seen. You know how in the GAC competency profile, they just put the heading and then they have the more detail in the columns? It's essentially just the headings that are there. It's not the greatest thing in the world. I'm going to pull it up now and then you'll see here. Open. Okay, so as that opens, we'll just read what it is. I think it's just 2 lines, which isn't great. Doesn't really help you if you've never had to think about that before.
Maybe they'll incorporate it into the question then, that they'll be looking at analyzing, thinking in your answer to the priorities of the government.
Yeah, maybe. It says analytical thinking. GAC employees must be able to identify and examine in detail the elements of a situation or problem. They must also be able to gather the pertinent information and establish logical links among the various pieces of information about the situation. You know what? This would be like an inbox exercise, Leanne.
Yeah.
Where they give you a bunch of different pieces of information and then they say, okay, sort it out. Right? That's also a way that they could test you. I don't know if they will do that in that way. How many people on the line have ever done an inbox exercise? Do you know what that term means? Have you heard that before? If you have not heard that before, you don't know what that is, please raise your hand. Okay, so I see Kate and Susan have raised your hand. So you don't know what that is. The rest of you, Amber, you've not seen it before. Who else has not seen this before? You've not seen an inbox exercise. You don't know what that is. So Vicky said not know. Yeah, this is, normally we see these things in training situations, right? Okay, so an inbox exercise works like this. They'll start off by giving you a scenario. They'll say you're an officer at post and your job is to, Leanna are both trade officers, so we'll focus there. Your job is to promote Canadian companies in your sector. Your sector is, you know, let's say agriculture, keep it simple. So you're promoting Canadian agricultural products, right? Anybody who has some great agricultural products out of Canada, you're making sure to promote them. So you're helping maple syrup producers, let's say, in your country. And then what will happen in the inbox, they give you some challenge. Okay, you're supposed to arrange for a big mission of maple syrup producers. They're gonna come to, you know, Xanadu, which is where you're on posting, and they're gonna be talking to the interlocutors here on the ground. Yay, so your job is to make the meetings that you're gonna bring these Canadian maple syrups producers to, and you're going to introduce them to the key buyers of maple syrup products here in Xanadu, and you're going to bring them to a conference that's all about promoting, maple syrup products or other agricultural products, because you want the Canadians to be exposed as much as possible to the local market and the local conditions so that they can, have some success selling their products internationally. Wonderful. The reason we call it an inbox exercise, it's because you literally have an inbox. And as you're trying to carry out the task that you're given at the beginning, the facilitators of the program will start adding more information. They give you another piece of paper that affects what you're doing, because that is how real life works. So while you're there working for this particular group of people, somebody else has come and said, the ambassador has come and said they want some speaking notes. They're going to be speaking at a big event tomorrow, and they don't have the notes, and your colleagues are all gone. So they've come to you now and said, can you write the briefing notes, the briefing note and the speaking notes for your ambassador while you're trying to manage this group of Canadian maple syrup exporters who are going to the Trade and Investment Conference? How do you manage that? How do you balance your time and your responsibilities? Then something else comes. Somebody else has a request saying, I need some help in another sector that you also cover. Can you introduce me? Can you help me? Can you sort me out? Can you do this for me? How do you manage that while you're still trying to do this Trade and Investment Conference, right? A whole bunch of injects. Exactly, Amber. That's exactly what happens. Sometimes they'll come and they'll tell you something that affects what you're doing. Here's a notice for you. Gas leak where the conference is happening. It's in the very place where the Trade and Investment Conference is happening. What do you do? Oh my goodness. What do you do? How do you react? So that's an inbox exercise. They give you lots of information. In a written inbox exercise, they may give you articles, and they'll give you, scenarios, and they'll give you everything all at once. And you'll have to sift through that information and pull out what's most important according to what the question is asking you, right? So the question's asking you to deal with something, but they'll give you details that are helpful. They won't give you everything, and they'll give you things that are kind of red herrings, that are extraneous. And you have to be able to understand and prioritize. This is what's germane. This is what's most important. This other stuff is important, but maybe I can deal with it later. And this other stuff is kind of irrelevant to what I'm working on, right? That's how that works. Make sense? Anybody have questions about that? Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
And is this sort of a situation where you can say, well, I assume I have a whole team working on this with me, and that I have 2 assistants, and so I start delegating. The result is great.
I think you can normally,
Don't do that. You can't make too many big assumptions like that. They want to see what you would do. And that's unrealistic to think that you're going to have 2 assistants and a whole team to work with.
Yeah, you can't, again, you can't assume away the heart of the question, right? You can't, if the problem is, how do you manage your time? Then you can't say, well, I don't need to because I have so much help. But you can
you can say, well, I know the property team works closely with this company, so they have internal contacts. So I would ask a local staff who knows this guy to fix a problem while I talk to this thing, and then talk to say the political team who are great with briefing notes for the ambassador. And then I give them the information that I have, like, can you show that you can delegate? Like, you will deal with it, but you realize you can't deal with everything alone within this time frame. So you ask for help, like from the get-go, and then you delegate appropriately. Can you do that? Or do you just try to be like a Superman/woman?
No, because you'll collapse. You'll collapse if you do it like that. And a lot
in real life, yes, I'll collapse. For the point of the exercise,
no, for the point of the exercise, again, it comes down to the wording of the question and the information that you're given. The information you're given will tell you what you have. And to the extent that it doesn't, you can make assumptions that are helpful to you, but not assumptions that assume away part of the thing that you're meant to deal with, right? That's the line that you have to walk. So again, if it tells you that you're at post, you can assume that you're not the only one there. right? You don't have to assume that there's a one person post and you're it. That's it. There's nobody else in your office. That's really kind of extreme. But most of it, the question, the way it's worded would tell you, because it will tell you your manager says this, your program manager says that. So what does that mean? It means you have a program manager. And if you have a program manager, you probably have an assistant, right? So you can assume one assistant, can't assume 5, right? Because that's not normal. If there's one program, there's probably other programs, right? So if it doesn't say, for instance, the question might say, okay, we're trying to create a whole of mission response. A whole of mission response indicates that there's more than one program there, right? It's not just a one program mission. There are other people who are also there, other streams, other core responsibilities of the government are being carried out in the mission. So if that's the case, then you can say, well, I assume I also have, if I'm a trade officer, I'm assuming I also have an FPDS officer as well. There's also a section that deals with that. And, based on that assumption, I would ask them for assistance. If there's no FPDS section at the mission, very unusual, but if there's no FPDS section at the mission, then I would ask headquarters, because there's going to be somebody at headquarters who's responsible for the political engagement with that country, right? Do you see how that works?
Right. So basically, say what you assume would be right, and then a contingency plan. Like in case they're not available or don't exist, I would also recommend that we approach HQ for assistance on X and Y and Z.
That's it. Yeah. Michelle, go ahead.
Hi, CJ. Just big thanks again for your energy and creativity with these questions. One thing on this, is it more about the process and not getting caught up and that there's a correct answer? I mean, unless you're using very poor judgment in terms of there's one red herring that's really you wouldn't prioritize that. But sometimes I get into these and I get so hung up on choosing the wrong answer. But is it really more of a process, thinking of it in terms of process and reasoning, or is there a right answer with these so that you don't embarrass yourself in front of your peers?
Well, I'll tell you, I remember the question that was the writing sample that I had to write when I was first applying to the department. So this is going back quite a ways now. But the question that was put to us was, you are running some kind of organization, and the idea is that you have 2 locations from which to choose. We're going to move. We're either going to, stay in this location and kind of expand it where we are, or we're going to move across town, into this other facility, this other space. And the question gave details about the pros and cons, the different pros and cons of both spaces. And it gave details about the employees, So one space had like a daycare facility. One space was easier to access by public transit. Another space, one space had lots of parking. The other space didn't have any parking. Those kinds of details were given about the 2 spaces. And the question was, which space do you choose to move to? Do you want to stay in this one and move into the expanded space in your existing location? Or do you want to move across town into this, state-of-the-art facility, but it's further away? Nobody cared what answer you picked. The question wasn't about what answer you picked. The whole point of the question was, how did you think it through? What factors did you consider? How did you weigh them up? And how do you write it in such a way that it makes sense, as if you were trying to persuade, in this case, the board of directors that has to make the decision, right? How then do you write what it is that's going on? How do you summarize really the core of the issue? How do you present to say, well, this is the best option? How do you acknowledge where there are pros and cons to what you're suggesting? How do you write persuasively that even though there are some cons to this option, the pros make it the better option to go with because of this, and this information that's in the scenario, right? And then how do you summarize it all and say, look, if we go follow this course of action, this is what's going to happen. A will lead to B, right? That's the idea. They want to see, how do you think? How do you think?
Thank
Makes
you.
sense?
Yeah, I agree. There's no right and wrong answer. It's how you structure your answer. there might be a red herring in there. So yeah, watch out for that. But otherwise, if you pick A over B or B over A, it probably doesn't matter so long as you justify why you picked A first and then B.
Right. Well, I can give an example. Like we recently had here in Spain, we were involved in a conference that was canceled because of COVID. And the organizers of the conference put to us to say, okay, what do you want? You can get 50% back of the money that you paid this year, and we call it quits, and you don't come back onto the show floor next year. Or we can give you credits that represent 125% of what you paid in 2020, but you spend those credits essentially over the next 3 years. Which one do you pick, right? So I had to prepare the pros and cons on that issue. Okay, if we go with this first option of getting back 50% of the money, what's the best value for money for the Canadians? What does that mean for the Canadian companies that are expecting to see us on the show floor in years to come? What does that mean for our relationship with the show organizers in the future? What does that mean for our provincial partners that also work with us and are also share the space with us on the show floor? Which one is going to be the best option if we take the first, option versus the second option, right? So that's what I had to do. I had to think it through and present recommendations based on the different factors that I saw. So that's the kind of work that we do here as Foreign Service officers. And that's what they want to see. Can you analyze the situation? Can you analyze the pros and cons, even in the face of uncertain information? Right? Because what was uncertain was what was going to happen the next year. Here in 2021, nobody knew, last year in February 2020, what was going to be, what the world would look like in a year's time. And yet we had to make decisions based on what we had available to us and what we predicted might be the most likely course of action. Make sense? Go ahead, Kate.
Thanks so much, CJ. I was just thinking while you were chatting about when you're analyzing a problem, and you always know you're going to have incomplete information because we don't live in an ideal world. And for the purpose, I wish we did sometimes though, right? For the purpose of this exercise though, where you're like, okay, well, I don't have all the information I need, but I'm going to make this assumption, right? Or I'm going to make this reasoning because of this. Could you, for the purpose of this exercise, say, like, identify that there is this incomplete information, it's going to impact ultimately your decision, but I may know of somebody I could reach out to, or I may know, somebody you could contact, or some information you could find to be able to supplement then your decision making. Can you address that, or is it kind of don't get into the weeds of how you'd access that information, or like, do they want you to start thinking about, look, you do have incomplete information and we're expecting you in your response to go and maybe find it before you make a decision?
Again, it will all come down to the wording of, it will all come down to the wording of the question. It will all come down to that. And also it will come down to how you manage your time as you're going through. When you, again, what we'd say is that, again, you read the question, you pull out the information that you've brought in your head with you, and you structure your answer, and then you start right. Then you go back, you read the question again, right? Make sure you've gotten it right. You structure your answer, and then you start writing. And you leave yourself time to reread your answer. You leave yourself time to reread your notes. You leave yourself time to reread the question. And if you have time, then you can add things in. Because it's a written exercise, you can go back in and add things. What we don't know is whether there's a word limit. There may be, because some other of your colleagues have said that there was a word limit in other VidCruiter written exercises. So you may be constrained by the actual template, by the actual platform, right? So if you have space to put things in and you have time, then you can certainly add it. It's not going to hurt you to add. You can put it even as a bullet to say, look, this is somewhat off the point. You write it right in there. This is somewhat, beside the point, or somewhat tangential. But if I could do this, I would also try to fill in some of the gaps in my knowledge by going here and asking this person, asking that person. But, the main point is what I've already laid out above, something like that.
Right. And they may kind of constrain you with like, this is a time pressure. So you just wouldn't be able to have that time to go and do it. Right? Just like, it's not an option for you, sort of thing. Okay. Right. That's making sense. Okay. Thanks so much.
No problem. There was another hand up. Go ahead, Leanne.
I think you should also, as an FS2, they're going to want you to consult. They'll want you to always consult with your boss, your supervisor above you. You can consult outwards to your colleagues. You can reach out to colleagues in other departments, to the private sector or to NGOs or whatever. And then if you do happen to manage staff, talk to them below you as well. So you want to have, like above, below, and out.
To the sides,
Always really
absolutely.
important to keep that in mind, when you're answering your question, because you don't know all the answers. You would never in the real life just make all the decisions yourself.
Right.
Not in the government,
Right.
So
Exactly.
make sure that you say, I would talk to my supervisor, or I would make sure I talk to the DG, or raise this issue with the DG or with the director or with my deputy director.
Right.
That you keep the chain of command in there too.
Right. Like in my example where we had to make the decision about the conference and what we would do in the wake of the cancellation, I had to consult with my provincial counterparts, right? Because they all had a say. I wanted to know what they wanted to do, those who had taken a space directly on the show floor and who were in the same boat as us, and those who were being represented by us on the show floor. So I had to consult with all of them, and that formed part of my recommendation. I was able to say I consulted with them, and based on the information that they gave me, that's told me that this might be the better course of action. So those are the things. But again, you'll see that as well in the wording of the question. They may ask you, tell us what sources of information you would draw on when coming up with your recommendations. That's a clue to you that, I have to go and look for sources of information. And one of the sources of information is always going to be other people. And as Leanne said, it's up, it's down, it's across. Make sense? I know this is a hard one because we don't have much to go on. I mean, we do have examples of written things that we've done in the past, but we don't have anything to suggest to you here because we simply don't know enough about what the format of the written section is going to look like. We do know the subject, of course. It's going to be that knowledge of priorities. So focus there, read through those 4 priorities, read through the core responsibilities, understand how it all works together, but keep those 4 in your mind. You're going to have to make reference to those 4 in some way for sure. And then when it comes to analytical thinking, again, it's to the extent to which you can take a look at a problem, understand what's going on, figure it out, and make it clear. Make it clear. Like do your logical laying out of what the problem is. What are the different elements that you would need to consider when coming to a recommendation, and then what the recommendation is at the end, right? If that's what the question is asking for. But normally when you're analyzing something, that's normally how it goes. Make sense? Go ahead, Michelle.
Sorry, quick question. Just your example you provided. I know they didn't list values and ethics as a competency or listed it in the poster, I don't believe, but is it helpful to be familiar with those and always have those in your mind in terms of a framework in responding, in terms of stewardship, integrity, transparency, or no? I don't know.
Yes. I would say yes, definitely.
Yeah, it's what underpins what we do, right? It's kind of like IT. It's the kind of the undercurrent without which we can't operate, right? So, but they're not asking you explicitly about that. They're not asking you which value and ethic is this. But if they're asking you something that has to do with, say, financial management, one of the things you can throw in to say is, look, the reason we would go like this is because that's how we get best value for money. It's taxpayer money that we're using to pay for this stuff. And we have to ensure that we get best value for money. That's proper stewardship of the money that's been entrusted to us by the Canadian taxpayer. Do you see? It's kind of like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? How was that? Was that helpful? I'm not sure because, again, we're not writing, we're talking about writing, so it's a bit more challenging. Anybody else a bit confused still or think to himself, I don't really know how to approach this?
And make sure you use like spell check and stuff. You don't want to send something in
Yeah.
bad grammar or incomplete sentences or, words spelled incorrectly. That's just like a turn off for anybody who's reading it.
Let me tell you, the system the platform they give you, I don't know what it has. It should have a spell check. I mean, I would imagine that it does, but I don't know if it will. But honestly, make sure you build time. You build time to go back and read your answer before you hit submit. Don't keep writing right up. Well, I was going to say don't keep writing up to the last second, but you can. This is how you do it. If you have 90 minutes, let's say they give you the whole 90 minutes for both questions, you're going to break up your time. You're going to say, okay, I'm going to read through the question. I'm going to jot down all the stuff that I know already. I'm going to jot down all the stuff that the question is asking me to do. Then I'm going to go back. I'm going to read the question again. I'm going to pull out the stuff that I missed the first time around. I'm going to spend time structuring my answer, but I'm only going to spend this much time doing that. I'm going to start writing at, this time. After 20 minutes, I'm going to start writing for sure, because that's 70 minutes left, right? And I'm going to write for 40 minutes. I'm going to just write. Okay, so now that's 60 minutes gone. That gives me half an hour. So now I'm going to spend 10 minutes reading through my answer, rearranging it, making sure it flows, making sure it looks right, whatever. Okay, so now that's an hour and 10 minutes have gone by. That gives me 20 minutes. So now I'm going to take 10 minutes. I'm going to go back to the question. I'm going to read the question again. And I'm going to see what else I missed. Maybe there's some nuances. Maybe there's some elements. Maybe there's something I misunderstood. And I'm going to see what I can do. But at the very end, that last 10 minutes, what am I going to do? I'm going to read my answer. I'm even going to read it out loud to myself as I'm sitting here. And I'm going to hear how it flows. Because part of effective written communication is you have to guide the reader through your answer in a very logical fashion. I'm going to read through and I'm going to look for the spelling mistakes. The reason you read things out loud is because you catch the errors. If you read things in your mind, your brain will fix errors for you. That's why you sometimes see those websites where they give you gobbledygook phrases, where it's numbers and letters all mixed together and letters are swapped, and yet somehow in your mind it's a very clear sentence because your brain fixes things for you. If you're forced to read things out loud, your brain stops fixing things for you and you start noticing the mistakes, right? So you're going to sit there, you're going to read it out loud to yourself. If you're worried about spelling, you read something out loud to yourself, spell it out loud to yourself. If you really want to be on top of spelling, spell the word backwards. Read it backwards and see if it's still right. You'll catch the error then. So that's how you do things. Those are all tricks you can use to catch your spelling mistakes, to catch your grammatical errors, to catch things that don't make sense. Stop, read it out loud from beginning to end. Don't skip any lines. And you make your corrections in those last 10 minutes. And that's what I mean when I say you can write right up until the end. It's to fix those things. It's to add that nuance. It's to make this thing clear. It's to make sure it all flows. It's to, it's to actually put headings throughout your document. Arrange it. There's no reason why you cannot put headings as you're going through to say here, introduction. You've asked me to do this, and this. Point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4. I will deal with each point in turn. Point 1. You asked me to analyze this problem, analysis of problem. Here it is. Point 2, identification of pros. Here they are. Point 3, identification of cons. Point 4, recommendations based on analysis of the pros and cons. There's no reason why you can't do that, right? So you think about how you're going to structure your answer. You think about how it all fits together. You decide in advance how much time you're going to spend. And those last 10 minutes, guaranteed you're going to spend it reviewing what you've written, right? Make sense? Okay. Any questions or more concerns? Any other comments?
Just a huge, huge thank you, CJ, for taking so much time out of your day to download all this great information for us to feel way better going into this exam, because it's a frightening process, and we're feeling better. I think we're feeling better. So
Yep.
I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. That's great. Any other comments, Leanne? Any last words of advice?
No, just good luck. Read the question, really read the question. You know, I failed an exam because I didn't read the question and I answered something different. So, you know, because I thought it said that and I totally went off and I didn't reread the question. So
Yeah.
take the time to read the question, underline it, use the keywords, make it easy for them, you know, make headings if you need to and stuff so that, you know, they can follow it. Try and be as logical as possible. But I think, you know, you guys are well prepared and study hard and, you know, I'm sure you'll all do great.
Yeah. All right. That's the written section. That's how our best advice for how to tackle it.
Bye,
Okay, so
everyone.
bye everyone. We're past the time. So that's it for this session. There's one more today and one more tomorrow, and that's it.
Thanks, DJ. Bye.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.